You're listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast. We're an independent, general interest bookstore putting great reads in the hands of people in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. Hosted by resident SKYLITers, we're here to bring you new and exciting author conversations, group reads, and bookseller chats. Happy listening.
Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome to SKYLIT. This is the SKYLIT Books podcast, and I'm your host, Hallie. Today, we're welcoming Paul Haddad to discuss his book, FREEWAYTOPIA, How Freeways Shaped Los Angeles, and he is joined by Steve DeVorkin. Before I introduce them, I just want to remind you that SKYLIT Books offers curbside pickup and online ordering via our website, skylitbooks.com. And now on to the show. Paul Haddad is the author of FREEWAYTOPIA, How Freeways Shaped Los Angeles. From the Arroyo Seco Parkway, which began construction during the Great Depression, to the Century Freeway, completed in 1993, Paul Haddad provides an entertaining and thought-provoking history of the 527 miles of roadways that comprise the LA Metro freeway system, which in turn offers insight into the evolution of Los Angeles. Paul is also the author of 10,000 Steps a Day in LA, 57 Walking Adventures, which was a Los Angeles Times bestseller and a local interest mainstay at SKYLIT Books. Steve DeVorkin has been with the California Department of Transportation for almost 30 years. As the department's TV and media specialist, he has documented several major freeway projects in Los Angeles and Ventura counties. Steve inherited a vast library of visual materials dating back to the 1930s and has become the keeper of the history of Caltrans. He was a valuable resource for connecting Paul to various parties who informed his research for FREEWAYTOPIA. Welcome, Paul and Steve. I am so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you very much. You just gave me my elevator speech that I've never been able to do at work, what I do for a living.
And I think we'll start off today's episode with a reading from Paul.
Great. Well, what I discovered growing up in Los Angeles, obsessed with freeways and feeling that there was a need to write about freeways as a reflection of the history of Los Angeles, was there'd never really been a deep dive about how freeways informed our city and vice versa. So what I came to realize as I was researching this book was each freeway around LA, and in my book, I focus on 12 of them. They're kind of the 12 primary freeways within the city of Los Angeles. Some of them exceed our city limits, like the San Diego Freeway. But each of these major freeways gets their own chapter in the book because each freeway kind of has built up its own personality. And you probably notice that as you're driving a particular freeway, you might feel happier on some, like the Marina Freeway or the Glendale Freeway, which are kind of devoid of traffic and are more like straight shots without a lot of traffic, maybe some nicer landscaping and that sort of thing. And then other freeways are just very dystopian and congested and just really get your ire up as you're driving. So each freeway has taken on a personality of its own. And that creates a kind of emotional validation loop between the motorist and the motorway. And so with that in mind, each of these chapters starts with just a few paragraphs where I kind of define the particular personality of a particular freeway. And so I will read from the beginning of the San Diego Freeway chapter. And after this passage, then we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of the particular freeway. So I'll read the introduction to the San Diego Freeway. Go big or go home. It's a bit of a gaudy phrase, implying that nothing short of an all-out assault will do, when sometimes subtlety is in order. But is there a more apt way to describe the San Diego Freeway? The 405 reigns supreme as the busiest freeway in the world. It's the longest freeway in Southern California, and it was the costliest to build for its time. It has inspired a bonanza of nicknames, all of them epic sounding. Construction through Sepulveda Pass was known as the Big Cut. Its junction with the 5 is called the Orange Crush. It's the only freeway to inspire cinematic labels, Carmageddon, Carmageddon 2, Jamzilla. And don't forget the small screen. The 405 ruled there too, co-starring with O.J. Simpson and his white Ford Bronco during the live slow speed chase of 1994. an event witnessed by almost 40% of the country. The freeway even dominates national social media. Who can forget the terrifying viral video posted by motorists driving through a mountainous tunnel of flames during the Skirball fire of 2017? And because it invokes so many over-the-top qualities that we associate with Los Angeles, the 405 is the defining LA freeway, right down to residents' provincial belief that everything revolves around Los Angeles, including a freeway that isn't even named after it. The San Diego Freeway's southern extremity is, of course, San Diego. And from there, it cruises northward through Orange County as I-5, switching over to the 405 at the El Toro Y. The 405 rejoins the 5 in San Fernando to complete its 157-mile journey. The focus of this chapter is on the 48.5 miles that reside in Los Angeles County. As the most trafficked stretch of roadway in the Southland, it is also the most loathed. Billionaire commuter Elon Musk hated its perpetual gridlock so much, he thought he could bore his way underneath it. He got a mile in before giving up, or should we say giving in, because really that's what 400,000 Angelenos do on a daily basis. The 405 is more than just a bad habit. It's the abusive lover you just can't quit. Every time you vow never again, you come back for more. And like any dysfunctional relationship, you always hate yourself in the morning. Come to think of it, in the afternoon and evening too. So since LA drivers can't 12-step their way out of it, it's high time we explore the powerful hold on Angeleno psyches that is the San Diego Freeway.
I am just fascinated by your verb. This is Steve, and your verbiage and your hold on to the psychological effect of freeways. And I have to make a little dirty secret. I'm going to read your book sometime. You said it to me, but I'm sorry I haven't read it yet. But that, based on that prose, you've really put the psyche of the public here, because it is a love-hate relationship, and truly a love-hate and a Stockholm syndrome thing. You know, you can't live with it, you can't live without it, and your mind is sometimes just goes in. I can find myself driving and going without even thinking now. The car just goes. So that's that was very good. Poetry, I would say, almost poetic.
Thank you, Steve. That's high praise from you.
About something so prosaic as the freeway. I mean, we drive it all the time, and I'm very familiar with it, but it does have that aspect to it that it is the fabric of our lives, especially in Los Angeles, because we, as you know, we always, there's that funny card. I'll go to the 605 to the 710 for you. You know, it's the matrix of our life.
Yeah, and I think, and Hallie, you probably have found this out yourself too. They're kind of the roadways we love to hate, and I think we resent freeways because we rely on them so much. So it's almost like a kid who has to rely on his parents, but the kid wants to be independent. And we want to be independent from freeways, but we rely on them to get around LA. And so we resent that.
Definitely. But they also bring kind of great comfort too. You know, when you get on the 405, it's like, okay, I'm on my way somewhere. Yeah. Progress,
efficiency, destination ahead. Right.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask a question. I would love to hear a little bit about kind of the origins of the freeway and why and when and how they kind of came to be what they are.
Absolutely. And Steve, jump in at any time if you want to correct me or add anything, since you're definitely the expert as a Caltrans employee. But, you know, there was a need. By 1920, the United States population reached an urban majority for the first time in its history. And so that's a pivotal year, because also in the 20s, automobile ownership became a lot more affordable for people. And so traffic jams started becoming pretty commonplace, especially in downtown Los Angeles. And agencies like the AAA and even LA officials in the state of California started looking for ways to improve roadways so that there wasn't so much traffic. And of course, this was happening back east as well, with the Robert Moses parkways in the New York area and in New England. And so what happened was, before it became a national program, the interstates of the 1950s, that eventually, was signed by President Dwight Eisenhower. On a local level, we were already looking at high-speed motorways. And so it was all kind of like a way to alleviate traffic. And also the Arroyo Seco Parkway, which you mentioned, Hallie, is the first freeway, that coincided with this City Beautiful movement, that we felt that citizens should be able to take pride in their civic infrastructure. And so that's why the Arroyo Seco Parkway, and eventually called for a while the Pasadena Freeway, is the most scenic freeway, because it was designed as sort of a country road that you could drive fast on between two urban areas, Pasadena and Los Angeles. So that kind of like then evolved into the Collier-Burns Act of the 1940s. And that was a California that was legislation passed in California that really opened the door for even more freeways in the state. And then, as I said earlier, by the 50s, that's when you had a federal mandated $25 billion program with 41,000 miles of interstate planned. It was the largest public works program in the history of our nation, in fact, the world. And that's when you really saw freeways kick into gear. And the government even planned 90% reimbursable for any states that would build interstates. So it was almost like an incentive to build even more. And that's kind of like those are the different stages as how we got here.
Los Angeles, in my work, I did a presentation on the Arroyo Seco, and in that work, I found out that we owe our roads to bicyclists, because in the turn of the century there was the bicycle phrase, and out of that came the Good Roads movement, which wanted to turn the bad streets and dirt roads, muddy roads, into paved streets. And that really was the genesis, the beginning, not the genesis. Well, that was the beginning of taking our roads seriously. And we had before the Arroyo Seco, we had an elevated wooden bikeway from downtown Los Angeles to Pasadena because of the bike. And that surprised me. So the want for good roads doesn't really predate, but it came from the bicycle. And from that, LA, it's always been, in my opinion, the hotspot of transportation. And as Paul said, LA County and the highways envisioned what became these freeways through the 20s, and then the California Division of Highways, which goes back to 1895, sort of combined together to make this happen. But LA really was, I don't get my foot in my historical mouth, but we really pushed boulevards and connections and throughways. And what I would like to do a book on the forgotten freeway. The freeway that nobody remembers is the Ramona Freeway, which predates, by 1935, at least a portion of it to be upgraded, which has been totally buried by the 10 and there, but it remains, and it's interesting. I just wanted to go back. What really struck me was your favorite and your least favorite freeways. I love the 210 through the Verdugos. I love driving that because you're in the middle of the country. It seems the mountains, and there's no city around you. And I'll have to say, in my opinion, the 710 is my least favorite freeway. So, but people do have favorite freeways. I feel that way.
Paul, why, or I guess for a question for both of you is, what was the research process like for this book? How did you go about it, and why did you decide to write it now?
Well, I decided to write it because freeways are such an ingrained part of the Los Angeles landscape. I was shocked that there was never really a comprehensive book about them. Freeways have been written about by people like Mike Davis, books, like City of Courts and more academic approaches to freeways, but one that was really breaking down freeways in layman's terms that is both an appreciation and also critical look at them, with a lot of pictures and stuff that really had not existed. So I felt there was a void in the marketplace. I write about Los Angeles in general. I'm always interested in what makes it tick. And how do we get here? That's a big theme of all my written work. What's the story that brought us to where we are today? And as far as the research, I did a lot of research of old newspapers to really have a firsthand account of what the process was like. The freeways were very much discussed, especially in the mid-century. It was given front page treatment on the LA Times many times. The Times was a big proponent of freeways because they were very pro-business. It was a largely Republican newspaper. So they were all about progress and building out LA, especially after World War II. And there was no shortage of information that I could get from digging up old newspapers, thousands of them I researched. And then I also did outreach with Caltrans, Steve among them, and also with some other people who could speak to the, later in the book, I talk about the inequities created by freeways. And I talked to a Black pastor who has written about the displacement of Blacks and Hispanics from freeways. His one quote that sticks with me from him, his name was Pastor Q Jean-Marie. He talks about how freeways are the bloodlines they're the arteries that carry the blood of segregation through America. And I thought that was very a phrase that stuck out with me. So I wanted to get a 360-degree view, and that was newspapers, Caltrans, activists. I wanted everyone to kind of have their say. One thing I liked about researching through newspapers was it definitely dug up some voices that were lost to history. And so some of those people get a lot of play in the book as well. People who were moved out of the way for freeways, who, tracking their sagas, and women engineers, and this one woman who refused to move from her porch for about 3 months when the Golden State Freeway went through, and she had a shotgun and was going to shoot at any rights of way agents who tried to move her. I told her story for a little bit. So there was all sorts of interesting things that came to the surface that I didn't really know about. And yeah.
For me, I guess it's personal. I've grown up with the freeways. My dad would wake me up in the mornings when I was a kid and say, "Hey, they just opened a new freeway. Let's go drive it." And it was very exciting, and it was very new, and it was part of that history of growing up. Now, I have experienced before Caltrans. Our house was in Santa Monica, and in some of the research, I saw that the Santa Monica Freeway was planned years ago, and I feel directly affected by the freeways because when I was growing up in the 60s, they started building the 10 freeway through Santa Monica to connect with downtown LA, and it disrupted my life. It took away friends, and it cut right through the center fabric of our neighborhood. And I turned to my dad later when I was with Caltrans and said, "Dad, when did you know the freeway was coming through?" He said, "Well, when the bulldozers showed up, there was no." And in his world, they gave no notice. And in the old days, the Division of Highways felt, we will beautify that place by putting a road through there. I don't know if that's our quote or Moses's quote from New York, but this is progress. It's good for you. And in the years that I've been with Caltrans, that attitude has been diminished to the point of, I don't know if it's LA itself, but we came up and invented, or at least spearheaded, the environmental movement. And these reasons we do environmental impact studies to mitigate the problems of the freeways. The excuse for why we put freeways through poor neighborhoods is because poor neighborhoods are cheaper to buy up than expensive neighborhoods. And that was the de facto point, but we never got into the idea of redlining and other such things. We're engineers. We're cost effective. My dad always rued the fact that why didn't they just put the freeway down Olympic Boulevard that had all that industrial property? They didn't have to put it through the neighborhood. Again, the freeways affect our lives in many ways.
And I can answer that, your dad's question, why not just down Olympic Boulevard? In some ways, it seems that there was a pattern as they built these freeways, as you said, to route them through poorer neighborhoods where the land acquisition would be cheaper. And you had people who were business owners through major corridors, whether it was Olympic or Hollywood Boulevard, for example. At one point, the 101 was maybe going to go through there to avoid Whitley Heights. And it was decided, the businesses are, there's a lot of lobbyists, the pro-business faction. You can't disrupt these business districts. And so we're going to keep those intact, and we'll just ram through, neighborhoods where we'll get maybe less pushback or people who have less sway with City Hall. And so it's the more expedient way to go often.
But I can't live without the 10. I mean, I look at it that side. I mean, yeah. I drive it all the time, but it is part of my history. I remember when I was in 5th grade, my elementary school in 1966 was right above that portion of the 10. And I was hanging on the fence looking at the opening of that part of the freeway and thought, how come I'm not down there? It's been part of my life. It is part of my life.
Because you both know so much about freeways, maybe in kind of different ways, but how do you predict the future of the freeway? How do you think they'll change? What is Caltrans worried about? Where are freeways going?
Well, let me jump in there first, because this is I can talk from an emotional stance, when I joined Caltrans about 30 years ago, they were in the Caltrans of the building the freeways, and they had suffered through the 70s and the cuts and the funding, but their main push was to do freeways. And over these years, financially, politically, we have now transformed into what we call a multimodal transportation industry, and that we will keep the infrastructure we have, but there's a push and a need to integrate city streets, biking, walking, pedestrians, and freeways, and transit to be a multifaceted and not just based on cars. So in my opinion, the days are gone of any new urban freeway. Though it surprised me, I went online and there are freeways on the planning books for other regions. There are new interstates planned, and I was very surprised to hear that. But the era of new freeways in LA is over, unless there is a big change in what we drive, how we drive, and how we get there. I was fortunate enough to be at the opening of the 105 and the 210, which I was amazed that we still had those freeways to work on. But we're continually improving or trying to keep up with progress, with maintaining the freeways, finding ways to keep them operational and flowing. And so it's a battle, because the time frame for building anything is 20 years, and in that time traffic changes a lot. The big change will have to be that we diminish the amount of cars or opt with more transit. It's always been that battle for for almost 50 years now. Now, for the expert, what do you think?
No, that's great. I mean, that's I concur. That seems to be the approach locally, at least, is just maintain existing freeways and find ways to incorporate more platforms for getting people around, whether it's biking, transit, light rail, that sort of thing. And then on a national level, Hal, you probably noticed, recently, certainly in the last year, the Biden administration has talked about ways to improve neighborhoods that were affected by infrastructure. And even Caltrans has put out a statement last year saying there was an inordinate a number of minority communities that were affected by freeway building. And so the federal government has acknowledged that as well. And there have been a lot of statements from Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, and from Biden himself about, we're going to try to earmark $15 billion in our infrastructure program and try to repair some of the neighborhoods affected by freeways. And in some cases, they're talking about tearing down freeways, decommissioning freeways. I think that'd be difficult in Los Angeles because we rely on them so much. But there's ways, to repair communities that I'm always intrigued by the idea of cap parks. And Steve, I'm sure you know about those. There's one over the 210, Steve's favorite freeway, in La Cañada, Flint Ridge. There's a green belt right over kind of like where La Cañada or Angeles Crest Highway goes over the freeway, right around there, right off Foothill Boulevard. And it's a park that just sits over the freeway that has a nice grassy field and a gazebo for concerts and farmers markets. And there's a playground. And if you can imagine something like that over the Hollywood freeway, it has to be over freeways that are trenched, right? That are submerged below grade. And then you could kind of span a park from, let's say, Santa Monica Boulevard over the freeway up to Sunset. And that way you kind of connect Hollywood, which is a very park poor area, and you can knit together some of these communities that were pushed apart by freeways. And so that's an intriguing concept that way you preserve freeways, but also strengthen the neighborhoods or patch them back together. That'd be really cool.
That goes back to the Park 101 concept that we supported, covering the downtown Los Angeles Harbor Freeway trench.
The downtown slot, they call it.
What is one thing that you wish people knew about freeways that they don't know? Something maybe surprising or...
I got to jump in here. It just hit me. People are always talking about bad drivers and how they make freeways better. It's not your own freeway. It's a team. Get on there and know that you're going to work with the other people. Let them in, let them pass, work together. It's not just you. I watch all the time people just cutting each other off, being angry, driving aggressively. If we all drove as if we were together, let them in, let them go. Slow down to 1 or 2 miles an hour. It's not your only freeway. There's other people. That's my big feeling.
Now more than ever, right? There's so much road rage and people driving over the speed limit right now. There's so much pent up aggression and anxiety from the shutdown, the COVID. But I would point to the misconception. Many people don't drive in freeways because they feel, oh my God, no way, it's unsafe, it's too scary. But freeways, as you know, Steve, are safer than surface streets. Statistically, when you get the number of cars going through there, the volume of cars, I mean, the East LA interchange alone has like 500,000 cars going through on a daily basis. Not a whole lot of accidents there. But if you look at 500,000 cars going, at any given time down, I don't know, Sunset Boulevard and Western or something, or any major boulevards, there are a lot of accidents because you have cross traffic, people making left turns, people merging in and out of parking spots and things like that. And freeways statistically are a lot safer than surface streets. So the next time someone's worried about taking a freeway somewhere, they can remind themselves that even with the crazy drivers, it's still a safer place to be.
What we're ingrained is stay out of we number the lanes from the furthest to the center, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you want to drive the freeways, use the center 2 lanes, 1 and 2 and 3. 1 is for the people who want to drive too fast, and 4 is got people coming on and off. So if you're in 1 and 2, you're very safe, and you're exactly right. It's a restricted flow freeway. There's no left turns, and yes, it is safer. It is safer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it. Everybody's an expert about how I know how to drive those freeways.
Yeah, and everyone wants it as their own private roadway. Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting. Was it last March or the March before, when the COVID first hit?
Yeah.
We had the idea to drive the freeways because there was no traffic, and we recorded instances that had probably not been seen since the freeways opened, of them being open and less cars. We documented it with driving around in my van and using a drone. And one of the most interesting aspects was we went to LAX and there was nobody there. We drove the upper and lower decks within a minute. So it
Wow.
was an experiment in what would be like without traffic. And except for the terribleness of the shutdown, we had that experience in 1984 when the freeways were worked better because they were more managed with time and trips than traffic. And so the freeways can be more efficient if we use them more efficiently, but that takes something more than just planning on the single part. I've been through many variations of whatever, the commuter and stuff like that. Now with the interconnectivity of the cell phone, this is what really will make a difference, is that we could use the phones, and with the traffic data we have, you could type in and say, what's my best route? What's the fastest route? And now I don't go anywhere anymore without turning on my GPS. I find it not only helpful because I can forget where I'm going, but if you're stuck in a traffic jam, that nice voice says, you are still on the best route. Keep going. And it tells me when I'm going to get there. It takes a lot of stress. If I have a 10 o'clock meeting and I know I'm going to get there 9:58, I don't get so stressed. The cell phones and the GPS, I think, has been a great boon, and we could use it more to relax on the freeways because it tells us what's going on. That's always been I'm ranting here. That's always been the point of Caltrans with traffic management, is getting the information of traffic out to the people so we can plan our trips and go around things. And I think this is the golden age of transportation planning.
I want to ask briefly too, you mentioned the intersection, was trying not to use that word, of freeways and race, and how cities are divided up. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how the freeways in Los Angeles have uniquely shaped the city. How are they different from other cities? What have been the kind of effects of that here?
Yeah, well, I think there is a similarity with the way freeways are laid out in Los Angeles with other cities, other cities like Houston or Baltimore, Detroit, et cetera, urban centers. To tell the story of like how freeways are laid out in LA, you have to look at where they were not built, not just where they were built, but where they were not. So if you look at a map of Los Angeles, you can see sort of this constellation of freeways centered around downtown, East Los Angeles. That's where the majority of them are. And that makes sense because that's where Los Angeles was founded, was in where Alvera Street is now, Los Angeles Plaza, downtown. That's the city core. So of course, like spokes from a tire, the freeways are going to spoke outward from the center. And that's what we have. But we also had a lot of opportunities to create freeways in West Los Angeles. And again, if you look at a map, it's pretty sparse. And that's one reason there is so much traffic on the 405. There's not a lot of north-south freeways through wealthier areas of the Santa Monica Mountains. So at one point on the books in the late 50s, there was an idea of doing freeways through Malibu Canyon, through Laurel Canyon, through, the Sepulveda Pass, which we eventually got with the 405, a freeway along Mulholland, or an expressway. So there was at one point in time a plan to create such a system in LA where no one motorist would be more than 4 minutes from a freeway. That was the ideal. And then reality kicked in, where a lot of, again, more affluent homeowners in Bel Air, West Hollywood, West LA, et cetera, Beverly Hills, they said no to the Beverly Hills Freeway along Santa Monica Boulevard or along Sunset or whatever route that Caltrans, now called Caltrans, planned. And so you have to look at that in the whole equation. Then where we did build a lot of freeways in the eastern Los Angeles area, Lincoln Heights, Boyle Heights, et cetera, about 17% of the landscape is covered by freeways versus maybe 2 or 3% in the rest of LA. And so when you look at it that way, then you realize that freeways were built in areas where there was a lower income neighborhoods because it was cheaper to build there, and often was cheaper because the land was deemed blighted or slum ridden. And that lowered the property values and made it easier for right-of-way agents to build there because there'd be less pushback. So that's ultimately why you had more displaced people of color when freeways went in, because that's primarily where they were built, given the fact they didn't have as much of a voice with politicians. That's really, if you really want to break it down. But also growth. There was more growth in the, eastern part of LA. So it made sense that freeways were going to be built there as well.
Looking back, if you do a rough overlay of the PE transportation, the Pacific Electric, if you're familiar with the interurban time, LA had an extensive interurban system.
And people will know them as the red car trolleys.
The red cars, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I won't go into the myths and the facts, but if you overlay the freeways, they followed the major routes of the PE. And one of the reasons the freeway went through my neighborhood is that the Santa Monica Airline, a track that's been there since 1875, went through my neighborhood. And the freeway followed that very closely. If you take the 10, you follow that train line all the way and then down Exposition. And we're living at a time that they've rebuilt the airline. It's now the Metro, what it's called, the Green Line, or they changed their numbers, but we're reinventing history. But the freeways basically followed traditional routes of transportation. And part of that is, that's where the term the wrong side of the tracks comes from. And it went through neighborhoods where the railroad was there, and there was one side of the tracks and the other side. And racism and white, it was all in hand. We didn't parse it out. It is what it is. I'm not making excuses for it, but we don't have the hindsight. We do have the hindsight now. Everything was for progress.
Right.
I have pictures of downtown LA in 1972, and it's almost 30%, 40% parking lots. And that was progress. Bunker Hill went away. A lot of stuff went away because it was quote, blighted, and they didn't see a future in it. And in my lifetime, beautiful houses, beautiful buildings have been torn down, turned into parking lots. And now those parking lots have been disappearing because they're turning into buildings. I mean, it's a cyclic sort of thing. And I like the building that's going on. I like the gentrification's got such a bad word, but when I started working Caltrans, nobody was in downtown past 5 p.m. And now it's a thriving neighborhood of people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just that old cliche, nothing changes like change.
Do you have any questions for each other? I would love to hear what you both want to know from the respective experts.
I feel like any questions I had for Steve, I got answered for my book through our multiple conversations.
I've always wanted to do a book on what was there before the freeways. I'm a big fan of silent movies, and Silent Echoes, James Bankston, I think the name is. he tracks old movie locations, and a very famous Buster Keaton movie was shot in downtown LA on Aliso Street before the freeway was there. And that got me interested in what was there before. Of course, in my lifetime, I know it was there in my neighborhood. We had a beautiful park. The Bunday Theater was taken, that I used to go to. It's interesting. I mean, I'm always interested in Los Angeles history because it's always been so ephemeral. I mean, we treated history here as something to get out of, to get away from, and I'm fascinated by what is here now and still is here, and what's left, and that we're rebuilding our infrastructure again. So my question is, I mean, what got you, I think they asked that, but you, on a personal level, Paul, I mean, is it the history of LA? Is it just, what gets you excited about the work you do? I mean,
yeah, freeways were something I was obsessed with as a young kid. You remember, I'm sure, and older listeners remember the Thomas guides before GPS. You'd have to pull up this packet of maps that was bound together, the Thomas guide, depending what part of the city you're in. You'd look up your grid. And I would study that even before I was driving. I became obsessed with it. I had this navigational obsession with getting around the city. And I was impressed by the efficiency of freeways. They were majestic, beautiful. I loved the bridges. The way little kids love dinosaurs, I love freeways. They were big and monolithic. And so that's where the obsession began as a kid. And then I realized that they helped tell the story of LA. And that played into my role as an author later of trying to tell the narrative of Los Angeles in my books. It just, they dovetailed, they jibed in my head. Hallie, I'm curious if you have a favorite freeway, or at least favorite freeway in Los Angeles.
Oh my God, I love the two. I love the Glendale Freeway. I could not tell you why. I just love it. I never take the 405, in part because it scares me a little bit. So I guess that would be my least favorite, but I should have prepared.
No, what you just said is probably the majority of people who know freeways. Some people may not get to a certain part of the city and I don't know. But yeah, if you know LA, the two often rises at the top for people. There's a whole love letter to the two online. This blogger who wrote this amazing thing. I quote her in my book, actually. And then, yeah, the 405 is the one that is, that's one reason I read the introduction to that chapter, because it is the most loathed freeway for various reasons. And it's so symbolic of LA in general, just in terms of our extremities. And it seems to encapsulate that. And it is the busiest freeway in the world. So there is that. It's not in your imagination.
And to my father, the 405 was a godsend.
Oh, and it was when it first opened. And it still is at 2 a.m.
Well,
there's no cars.
If we could, we had relatives in the valley, and that every time we visited them, we got stuck in that damn Sepulveda tunnel, that 2-lane tunnel, that bottleneck.
Which was very deadly at the time before the freeway. And it was known as Blood Alley.
And Dead Man's Curve were on the other side where Mel Blanc, that was part of my history. Mel Blanc was a member of our temple in Santa Monica, and we were told that Bugs Bunny had died. I mean, as an 8-year-old, so that was Sepulveda was horrible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you had to live through it. And so we watched them move this earth. My dad kept saying, look at all that earth moving. Look at what they're doing. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
The big cut. So, I mean, again, I grew up when freeways were the best thing. They talk about the demise of the red cars by the conglomerates, but really the the thing with the red cars in California is the red cars were a part of the boom, the real estate boom. They were built to build out LA. And once they accomplished that in the 20s, they started to deteriorate. My dad loved them and he missed them and he talked about them all the time. And in my research, casual research, I realized that that transportation system was being overshadowed by the automobile from the 20s. They started shutting down lines way before the myth of Goodyear and GM coming in and killing them, which they did. But if I could go back in history, the Cahuenga Pass had the PE line. PE line was there since the 1800s, and then we built the Cahuenga Parkway, which also got diminished by the Arroyo Seco because that opened the same time. The Cahuenga Pass, that beautiful architecture with the bridges and stuff, that opened in 1940 also, and we had the PE going down the center of it, and the PE begged to be included in new freeway plans. And in my mind, and I don't want to get stuck here, the state responded, no, you're private, we're public, there will never be a combination. And now we have nothing but private public works together. And I wish we could have saved what was there, and because we put a line down the 105. I mean, it was a good idea. I just wish we had done it much earlier because they work well in tandem. But I also lived through the 70s and the gas crisis, and I remember a thing with in those same years that there was posters of all these big freeway ramps, and they were populated by bicyclists at the day of the car was over. So it's a cliche, but it's been a hell of a ride.
Thank you so much for sharing your work with us, Paul, and Steve. Thank you for being here as well. For you listeners out there, today's guests once again were Paul Haddad and Steve DeVorkin, and they were discussing Freewaytopia and freeways. And you can order your copy at SKYLITBooks.com. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylitbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.